So the thing that I have realized about my system that I want to explore, and I got to find a way to make it, I guess, more inventive and more interesting, to meet your challenge, is one of the core aspects of Heroic Dark is it plays into the trope of dying, character death, and then starting at zero after you die. But the situation is the game stays the difficulty it was when your character died.
So let's see if I'm understanding this correctly. And the best way to help me do that is to think of it more in terms of fictional events. Can you give me a visual for a character in Heroic Dark? And I know there are customizable elements and stuff like that, but we're just going to make some up. We're just going to make some up. And
so let's say there's a grand wizard who started off with some real basic stuff, like he knows a lot about arcane magic and lore, so he can, figure out a lot about what's going on in the world. He had a history as a bookbinder, so he's really well educated. So he just has these sort of base level points to start off from. He's fighting the darkness. Let's say the darkness is, let's just steal from D&D, like Dark Sun, and say that magic can be used to destroy the environment if it's not used correctly. And that's the darkness, is that people are using magic in a bad way that's destroying the environment. So he's like this sage that's, growing in power and becoming more powerful in magic, and his goal is to use magic in a way that protects and preserves, and he's trying to stop the dark wizards that are using it in a destructive way. So, and then after playing for a while, the game gets more difficult mechanically. The enemies get more powerful, the risks get stronger. Darkness is progressing toward final victory. The heroes are also progressing toward final victory. This wizard has unlocked some new skills, just to kind of make himself broader. And he probably invested in a bunch of little knick-knacky powers that are useful in specific situations. So he's, very flexible character with, a lot of breadth of ability.
Mm-hmm.
And then he dies. And then the new character starts out at level 1,
right,
without that huge breadth of powers and skills that character had. But the enemies are just as tough as they were for that wizard that was at higher level.
Okay, now for you, tell me a little bit more about this isn't intended to be a zinger question. This is just rounding out the understanding. Tell me about the coolness about that. I've played my character's bitten the dust. I start my new character. Is there anything by which I would be excited to play this new character?
I think it's, as long as everyone's bought off on trying to pursue the final victory, it's kind of more of a sports analogy where your really good character got injured and taken out of the season, and you're really close to, getting into the finals or whatever, and you're putting in your second stringer and hoping that they do good enough to make it there.
So actually, there's more than, even in sports, this has, since it's not a strategy, it's drama. Can the rookie make it? There's a movie right there. It's not in real sports. That's just considered a liability. Shit, we have no choice. We just have to keep going. But in a story, this is what we're watching for. We're watching for the moment when the sort of the face hero goes down, and now who can Bob the can Bob the sub actually cut the mustard on this. And so I kind of like that, but there are a couple of things that come to mind. One is in terms of raw statistics, and without making the whole thing so mechanical that it's uninteresting. What chance does poor Bob have? is a good
Yeah.
question. First of all, I mean, I'm not demanding an answer. I'm just saying that Bob can't. I mean, level 1 dude, new dude, cannot be nothing but a load as far as the rest of the characters are concerned. Number one. Number two, it is an interesting opportunity to kick in a different approach to the mechanics. Perhaps there are modes of resolution or zones or spheres of activity or ability that a substitute character has that a old character, a starting character, doesn't, even though it is true that they are, quote, weaker in terms of raw effectiveness. But there are zones of things that are accessible to them that the original characters don't have. So, in other words, it's not as though you want to lose your old character because what you've built up is uniquely good. But losing them means that this character comes in who's less directly effective, but also potentially has ways of improving that the first one didn't. Do you see how does that make sense in terms of sort of, making the whole thing a little bit more interesting, a little bit more desirable for either? You can be proud of your dude for making it all the way through. You can wring your hands and say, oh God, how is Bob going to make it? Poor Bob is walking in over his head. But, the rules say that, but it is a new hope. Because, there are things that this guy can bring into play that the others can't. It also makes everybody glad to see Bob.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe want to take care of him. So, when he bulks up into his new zones that, so there's some cool dynamics that can come into that as part. I'm trying to riff off of exactly where you're aiming with this aesthetic. And another interesting aspect is that new characters might be either empowered or defined in ways based strictly on the events of play. Therefore, you can make up characters who literally, conceptually, were impossible at the start because of the events of play that have occurred. That sounds more squishy. It might not necessarily be totally squishy, because you do have metrics to draw upon after sessions that you could even use as a baseline for character creation. So all of that's kind of an interesting idea. It also means that you get to be nice and ruthless in terms of scenario design and play. One of the nice things about the Mountain Witch, to go back to that for a moment, was that if your character dies, you do not bring in a new character, but you continue to play as everyone else's memory of the character, and you can make that as supernatural as you want. You can actually have them be, ghostly present, or it can be just, a memory thing, but they can still draw upon the trust that you placed in them. And so, there are so your ability to lend help I'm trying to remember what the rule was. I think in order to benefit from trust, you had to say you were helping, and then the trust they have in you is how much they get, or something like that. The point was is that you were present to say, yeah, you can draw on your memory of me, but it was up to you to say so. So, therefore, a lot of the important dynamics of play, of being a player in the Mountain Witch, were preserved, even though the character was dead halfway down the mountain. Which worked really, really well. It was one of the first games in which character death means you keep playing about and with that character sheet anyway. So I'm not suggesting exactly the same, but I'm giving you the idea that there's a lot to work with in terms of adding dynamism to character death rather than just start over. And I'm trying not to lose your cool idea that it is tougher. We want to keep that, based on what you said. So, is this helping at all? Giving you kind of
it's helping, and I think I got some stuff to toy with. I think thinking of a new avenue of interesting abilities for replacement characters is something I hadn't considered yet, so it's something I can dig into.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like yeah, overall, like the core of the emotion of the game that I'm going for is, you have these heroes, they're all in it together, they're risking life and limb, they are acquiring powers, but at a similar rate, they're acquiring dangerous injuries
Right.
that are weakening them and increasing the likelihood that they will die. And they're just trying to hold on for as long as they can to basically, from a narrative sense, to hit the darkness where it hurts and save the realm. From a mechanical sense, you're trying to hold on to score as many points
Right.
as possible
Right.
for the good ending. You're
Mm-hmm.
trying to get
Mm-hmm.
the good ending. But yeah, I think triggering some sort of game change for how your character is when a character dies could make that more significant and make it more interesting.
Yeah, I think that there's also the idea too of what sort of improvement you see, given the framework you're talking about, improvement for your starting characters does matter because you do need to bulk up against the increasing adversity. And furthermore, that is in and of itself how it's not just that it's fun, it's that it makes sense that the characters are becoming stronger because they've chosen to battle the dark. They're drawing upon reserves. They're pushing themselves to improve, to learn, to develop their ability to fight the dark. And we want to see that. That in and of itself is fictionally fun, more so than just getting a higher number on your sheet. So to keep that seems like a really good idea. I am thinking as well of games where the characters' improvements. I was talking about this with Justin in our design curriculum talk. I was talking about this with him when he was talking about characters improving. I was talking about how instead of simply becoming beefier, which is in D&D terms more hit points, more spells, higher chance to hit, weapons that do more damage, instead of just those, that one of the things that I really liked about 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons was the way that many, many, many of the new abilities and powers, they actually affected areas of the combat or were triggered by someone else doing specific things or triggered other things or capabilities in others. So if you had 4 or 5 characters at a few levels in, the kind of play space, the kind of combat space that was created by them all being in one spot with these different powers, abilities, and which ones they chose to use in the proximity of whom, created a dynamism to combat so that the combat literally could not be predicted in terms of outcome, which is always a plus. And furthermore, and also hard to do with the D&D template. And then furthermore, it also meant that the people in question would be looking at their characters and going, what is the thing to do? What is the thing that I'm going to have my character do? I'm not going to just wade in, hit with my hardest power, hit with my hardest attack, stand there, hit with my hardest power, hit with my hardest attack, because if I don't, then my effectiveness drops, no matter what else I do. Here, with all these different abilities, with these different ways, they're not just all attacks, they are ways to permit this guy to take a free attack, and stuff like that. That meant that you said, well, I need to get within a certain distance of them. In some cases, that means making yourself vulnerable. In other cases, the player will say, okay, I'm going to stay within a certain distance of you because I know that you're going to be able to trigger that for me sometime. So there's all kinds of different ways that can play out in a given situation. And so improvements which may technically improve the character. I mean, it's an attack or whatever that they didn't have before, so it is an improvement. But are more about altering the dynamics of choice within an encounter rather than simply upping the gain on the same variables.
The thing that's popping in my head that I think might make this more dynamic and more codified, the whole idea of the second stringer, the rookie coming in to the progress battle, is this idea of mantles, like a weight of responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can basically, tie an interesting mechanic and some interesting story ideas to this concept of a mantle, that the rookie really is picking up where
Right.
the other guy left off.
Yeah, but it's a bigger suit than he can wear, in some
Yes.
ways too. At least at the present. I like it quite a bit, and I think that it gives a little bit like Death in the Mountain Witch. It doesn't make you want your character to die, but it means that your character dying isn't the enormous letdown and the enormous waste of time in play, that you thought that it would be otherwise.
Right.
And so a few other things like that, particularly if then the improvements that we're talking about are, it would be interesting if the darkness, the adversity, did increase mainly in terms of raw power. But character improvement might have some of that, but would primarily focus on breadth and overlap of what happens if this and the other thing. All these different contingencies that can only really be discovered in play and, aren't just racking up more and more effectiveness.
Right.
But there would be effectiveness in terms of context and timing and choice of use rather than effectiveness just in terms of bulk. But the darkness the darkness is stupid, right? In this, the way I'm looking at it at the moment, the darkness is stupid tactically. It just grows. The question is whether you guys, with all of your different oddly shaped instrumentation, can angle those instruments at the right times in order to get an effect that you otherwise none of you could get.
Right.
And I wouldn't want to over-script that. The best way to do it is to have a whole bunch of cool different stuff and just let the as long as each one has integrity in game design terms, then you can just let it go to town, and just see what happens when people put them together. And that, do you see how it's kind of sad? I mean, to me, and I don't want to instruct you, if you don't like it, you don't like it. But to me, it's amusing almost, or satisfying, to think of the darkness as being basically just a cancer, right? All it does is grow and get tougher. Whereas you guys are a different thing in terms of your improvements.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that's a good challenge. That I think right now my powers aren't very interactive, with the exception of there's a move called assist, and you can have a ton of powers around that move if you want, and that's about the closest to an interactive power the system has right now. So I think I can challenge myself to come up with more interactive powers, and then also I think roll out this idea of the mantle to kind of have that sense of continuity and dramatic change when a character dies. So I think that's two things that are worth thinking about. So thank you for the call.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you, Dustin.